She ran one of the most powerful tech companies in America, and she was terrified of going home. Every night while the rest of the building emptied out, Sophia Bennett stayed. Not to work, not to answer emails. She sat in the dark behind her office glass and watched a maintenance man fix broken things. And somehow, that was the only place she felt safe. He had no idea she was watching. He had no idea who she really was. And he definitely had no idea that the quiet woman in the wheelchair was the reason none of the lights on the 14th floor ever seemed to stay fixed for long. What happens when the most guarded person in the building finally gets caught? And why would one of America's youngest CEOs whisper to a janitor, "Please, don't make me leave"? If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories we tell on this channel will wreck you in the best possible way. Give this video a thumbs up if you love a story that hits different, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The elevator doors opened at 11:47 p.m., and Ethan Carter stepped out onto the 14th floor of Asterion Technologies carrying a toolbox in one hand and a thermos of cold coffee in the other. He was tired. He was almost always tired. He set the toolbox down near the first row of cubicles and rolled his shoulders until something cracked. The floor was empty, the way it always was at this hour. Screens dark, chairs pushed in, the faint smell of recycled air and someone's leftover takeout from earlier in the day. He liked it this way, quiet, predictable. Nobody asking him questions, nobody watching him work. He pulled out the maintenance log and checked tonight's tickets. Flickering light in the northeast corridor, loose cabinet hinge in the storage room, water pressure issue near the executive bathrooms. Same building, different night, same problems cycling through like laundry that never actually got clean. He started with the light. The northeast corridor was a long stretch of frosted glass and polished concrete that ran along the outer edge of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one side looked out over the city, all of it lit up and restless 20 stories below. On the other side, a series of private offices, most of them dark. At the far end, one was not. Ethan didn't pay attention to that right away. He climbed his stepladder and started working on the first panel, unscrewed the casing, found the loose wire that was causing the flicker. A simple fix, the kind that took 4 minutes and left him with nothing to think about, which he liked, because the things he had to think about at home were complicated enough. His daughter, Lily, had started second grade 3 weeks ago and was already convinced she hated her teacher. She didn't actually hate her. Ethan knew that. She was just scared, the way she got scared every time something new started. She'd been that way since her mother left. Quiet for a few days, then stubborn, then slowly fine. He'd learned to wait it out. He'd learned a lot of things about waiting. He secured the wire, replaced the casing, switched the panel back on. The light held steady. He climbed down, moved to the next one. That was when he noticed the office at the end of the corridor. The light inside was on, not the overhead fluorescence, but a desk lamp, warm and low. Through the frosted glass wall, he could see a figure sitting very still. Whoever it was hadn't moved the entire time he'd been up on the ladder. Ethan wasn't the type to stare. He glanced once, logged it as occupied, and told himself it wasn't his concern. Night staff existed. Not everyone left at 5 o'clock. He finished the corridor and moved to the storage room. The storage room hinge took longer than expected. The screw holes had been stripped at some point, probably months ago, and whoever had attempted to fix it before him had just kept driving the same screws into the same holes until the wood gave up entirely. He had to rebore the holes, fill them, wait for the compound to set. He sat on a stack of printer paper boxes and drank his cold coffee and looked at his phone. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Park, from 3 hours ago. "Lily's asleep. She ate half her dinner and all of her dessert. You're welcome." He typed back, "Thank you. I owe you." She replied immediately, even at midnight, because Mrs. Park kept strange hours. "You owe me nothing. Bring me those persimmons when they're in season again." He smiled at that and put the phone away. He thought about Lily eating only half her dinner, the way she'd been doing lately. She used to eat everything. She used to eat his plate too if he wasn't fast enough. He made a mental note to call the pediatrician, then made a second mental note that he'd been making that mental note for 2 weeks and hadn't actually called yet. He finished the hinge, tested it twice, packed up his tools. On his way back through the main floor, he passed the northeast corridor again. The office at the end was still lit. He hesitated. His log said nothing about that office. No work orders, no complaints, nothing that required him to go near it. But it was almost 1 in the morning, and the building's security desk generally liked to know if someone was still on site this late. Protocol said he was supposed to check. He walked down the corridor. The name on the door was small and plain. A single nameplate mounted in brushed steel. S. Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Ethan stood outside and looked at it for a second. He'd seen the name before, in the company newsletter that got taped to the break room bulletin board every quarter. He'd never met her. He'd never met anyone from the executive floor. That was its own world, and maintenance wasn't part of it. People up there had assistants who handled things. They didn't see people like him unless something was very broken. He knocked. 3 times, not loud. Nothing. He knocked again. "Hello, building maintenance. Just checking if everything's okay in there." A pause. Long enough that he almost walked away. Then, "I'm fine." The voice was quiet. Controlled, but only barely. The way someone sounds when they've been sitting alone for a long time and don't quite remember how to make their voice do normal things. "Okay," Ethan said. "Sorry to bother you." He was already turning to go when he heard the sound. Small, almost nothing, just the soft mechanical hum of a wheelchair moving across a hard floor. And then the door opened. She was younger than he expected. That was the first thing he noticed, and he felt a little stupid for noticing it because it didn't matter. She was maybe late 20s, dark hair pulled back without much care, wearing a blazer over a plain shirt, the kind of outfit that had started the day looking put together and had slowly lost the argument. Her eyes were dark and sharp and slightly red around the edges, though she looked like she was working very hard to make sure he didn't notice that part. "Did security send you?" she asked. "No, I was in the corridor, saw the light. It's late, I was just making sure." She looked at him for a moment. Not the way executives usually looked at maintenance staff, which was mostly through them. She actually looked at him. "How long have you been on this floor?" she said. "About 2 hours." "I know." She said it before she could stop herself, and something shifted in her expression, a quick, almost invisible tightening, like she'd stepped on something she hadn't meant to step on. "I mean, I could hear you working, sound carries." Ethan nodded. "Right. Sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't." He picked up his toolbox. "Well, building's pretty empty. If you need anything, I'll be on 16 next." "The bathroom fixture," she said. He stopped. "What?" 16th floor. There's a water pressure issue in the executive bathrooms. It's been on the log for 2 weeks. He stared at her. Yeah, that's on my list." She didn't say anything else, just watched him with that careful, contained expression, like she was waiting to see what he'd do with that information. He didn't do anything with it. "Okay," he said. "Good night." "Good night," she said. He walked away. He heard the door close behind him, soft and deliberate. In the elevator, riding up to 16, he stood there with his toolbox and his thermos and tried to figure out why the CEO of a $20 billion company was alone in her office at 1 in the morning, apparently fully aware of every maintenance ticket in the building. He didn't figure it out. He fixed the water pressure and went home. The next night, Lily was in a better mood. She met him at Mrs. Park's door in her pajamas and launched herself at him before he'd even fully come through it, arms around his neck, feet off the ground, absolutely certain that the correct way to greet her father after 8 hours was to nearly take him off his feet. "Dad," she said, very serious, into his shoulder, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," he said, carrying her back toward their apartment. "My teacher said I was very creative today." "That's great, Lil." She said it like it was a bad thing. He shifted her to his hip and unlocked their door. It wasn't a bad thing. She said it while looking at my math worksheet. "What did you draw on your math worksheet?" Lily considered this for longer than she needed to. "A whale," she finally said, but it was relevant. He set her down in the hallway and toed off his boots. How was a whale relevant to subtraction? The whale was subtracting fish. She looked at him like this was obvious. From the ocean. He looked at her for a second. She was so much like her mother in moments like this. That absolute certainty, that refusal to accept that she might have gone sideways somewhere. And for a moment he felt it, the way he still sometimes did. That low, dull ache of a thing that used to be there and wasn't anymore. But Lily was already running toward the kitchen to show him something she'd made at aftercare, and the moment passed, and he followed. He made dinner. She ate most of it this time. He counted that as a win. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the light on low and looked at the stack of bills he'd been rearranging instead of paying. The truck needed new tires. Lily's dentist appointment was next week. He'd been at Asterion 11 months, and the pay was steady. But steady didn't mean comfortable. It meant managed, carefully, with no room for surprises. He thought about the woman in the CEO office, sitting alone in the dark with a desk lamp. He thought about how she'd known which floor he was going to next. Then he stopped thinking about it, because it wasn't his business, and went to sleep. The third night, he was on the 14th floor again. Different tickets, a thermostat acting up near the east stairwell, a flickering exit sign above the fire door. He worked through them quietly, and he tried not to look at the office at the end of the corridor. He looked anyway. The light was on again. And this time, when he got close enough to the corridor to see down its full length, he stopped. Because the door to the CEO's office was open. Just slightly, maybe 6 inches, no more, and she was sitting in her wheelchair just inside the threshold, facing outward, facing the hallway. She wasn't reading anything. She wasn't on her phone. She was just sitting there, watching him. She didn't look away when he noticed. She didn't pretend she hadn't been looking. She just held his gaze steady and unreadable, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Ethan set down his tools. He walked toward her, not because he had a work reason to, but because the situation seemed to require him to. When he was close enough to speak normally, he said, "You're here again." "I work here." "At 1 a.m. The company doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. "Sure," he said, "but everyone else goes home." Something moved behind her eyes. Not quite pain, not quite anger. Something that didn't have a clean name. "I have work to finish," she said. "Okay." He looked at her for a moment. "You've got your door open." "The ventilation on this side of the building is bad. It gets stuffy." He glanced up at the vents. "I can put a ticket in, get someone to look at it." "It's fine." "Doesn't sound fine." "It's fine," she said again, and there was an edge in it now. Not hostile, just definite. Stop looking at things that aren't broken. Ethan reached up and checked the vent anyway, just to have something to do with his hands. The filter was clogged. Not catastrophically, but enough. "I've got a replacement filter in my bag. Take 5 minutes." He expected her to tell him not to bother. Instead, she said nothing, which he took as permission, and he got the filter and swapped it out while she stayed in the doorway and watched him work. It was a strange feeling being watched like that. Not uncomfortable exactly, just noticed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt noticed at work. When he was done, he put the old filter in a bag and looked back at her. "Should be better now." "Thank you," she said. Simply. No performance in it. He nodded and picked up his bag. "You have a daughter," she said. He stopped. "I've seen the photo. On your lanyard." She nodded toward his badge, which had a small plastic sleeve behind the ID where he'd stuck a photo of Lily from her first day of kindergarten 2 years ago, grinning with both front teeth missing. "Yeah," he said. "Lily, she's 7. She looks like trouble." He almost laughed. "Yeah, she really is." Sophia, he'd already started thinking of her by name, which felt presumptuous, but he couldn't stop it, looked at the photo for another second, then back at him. "How long have you been on the night shift?" 11 months. That's a long time to be up when everyone else is sleeping." "It works for us," he said. "I'm home when she gets up. Drop her at school, sleep, pick her up. We make it work." She looked at him, not skeptically, not with pity, just directly. Like she was actually absorbing what he'd said. "That's harder than you made it sound." He didn't answer that, because she was right, and he didn't feel like confirming it. "I should finish my rounds," he said. "Of course." She moved her chair back slightly, pulling herself out of the threshold. "Good night, Mr. Carter. Ethan." "Good night, Ethan." He walked away down the corridor. At the elevator, he pressed the call button and stood there waiting, and he realized his chest felt slightly different than it had 20 minutes ago. Not lighter exactly, but less like a closed room. He rode up to 18 and fixed a broken hinge on a supply closet and didn't think about it, or tried not to. It became a pattern without either of them deciding it would. He came in at midnight. He worked his way through the building's slow catalog of small failures, and somewhere in the middle of the night, usually between 2 and 3, he'd end up on the 14th floor, and the light in the CEO office would be on, and the door would be open. Just a few inches, never more. And sometimes they'd talk, and sometimes they wouldn't, and both of those things felt oddly natural. She asked him questions, not personal ones, not at first. She asked how he'd figured out a particular wiring problem, asked what tool he'd used to fix the stairwell door that had been sticking since August, asked how he'd known the water pressure issue was a valve rather than a pipe. He answered. He found himself talking more than he usually did. He asked her things, too. He kept them small, not because he was being careful, but because small was what he had. He asked if she wanted him to bring the coffee maker from the break room upstairs since the one on 14 seemed to be permanently out of service. She said no. He asked if the vent he'd fixed had actually helped. She said yes, somewhat grudgingly, like admitting it cost her something. What he didn't ask, because it wasn't his business, was why she never seemed to leave. He'd been at Asterion long enough to know the general shape of how the building worked. The executives filtered out by 7 at the latest, even on the late nights. Sophia Bennett's car. He'd seen it in the garage, a dark sedan with a modified hand control system, sat in the same spot every morning when he came back to get something he'd forgotten. And it was still there in the evening when his shift started. Same spot, every day. She was living in the building. He didn't bring it up, but he knew. Mant. The night he found out why, he hadn't meant to find out anything. He was fixing a cable run near the server room on 15, a tedious job, mostly lying on his back in a narrow access corridor feeding wire through conduit, when he heard voices from the conference room on the other side of the wall. The walls in this part of the building were thin and poorly insulated, something he'd noted on 3 different occasions without ever seeing it addressed. 2 men. Maybe 3. He couldn't make out words at first, just tone. Hushed, deliberate. The kind of conversation people had when they knew they shouldn't be having it, but had decided to have it anyway. He worked quietly. He wasn't trying to listen. Then one of them said, "She's not capable anymore. The accident changed her. Anyone who spent 10 minutes with her can see it." Ethan went still. "Haverson has the paperwork ready," another voice said. "Once the psychological assessment is filed." "It's not a real assessment," the first voice cut in. "It's what we need it to be. There's a difference." A third voice, quieter. "And the board is solid on this?" 7 of 11. More than enough. Ethan lay in the access corridor and looked up at the underside of a cable tray and did not move. "She'll fight it," said the quiet voice. "Let her. She's already been in that office for 3 weeks without coming out. She's not fighting anything. She's hiding." A pause. "She used to be something," the quiet voice said. Ethan couldn't tell if that was sympathy or an epitaph. "It's a shame what the accident did to her." "The accident is over," said the first voice. "What she does with the aftermath is a choice, and she's chosen wrong. Get the assessment filed by Thursday." Footsteps, a door opening, closing. Ethan lay there for another minute without moving. Then he carefully finished feeding the cable through the conduit, capped it, climbed out of the crawl space, and collected his tools. He walked to the elevator and pressed 14. The office door was open. The lamp was on. She heard him coming because she always seemed to. She told him once that the building had its own sounds, and she'd learned all of them, and he was starting to believe her. She was already facing the door when he came down the corridor. He stopped at the threshold. He looked at her. She looked back. Something in his face made hers change, go still, then careful. "What happened?" she said. He almost told her. He had the whole thing right there, ready to come out. What he'd heard in the wall, what they'd called her, what they were planning. He had it lined up and ready. But he looked at her, at how she was sitting, upright, controlled, like she was always halfway braced for something. and he thought about what it would do to her, hearing those words from him. A stranger, at 2 in the morning in a building she'd turned into a hiding place. "Nothing," he said. "Just wanted to make sure you'd eaten something." She stared at him. "What?" "It's 2:15. There's a vending machine on 12 with actual food in it, not just chips. You look like you've had coffee and not much else." The look she gave him was, there was no clean word for it, somewhere between confused and something softer that she wasn't showing on purpose. "I'm fine," she said. "Yeah, you keep saying that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face shifted, just slightly, not softening exactly, more like a door moving on its hinges without opening. "The machine on 12 takes cards," she said finally. "There's a protein bar in the third drawer of my desk. I'm fine." "Okay," he said. He stood there another second. He wanted to say something else. He didn't know what exactly, but the weight of what he'd heard was sitting heavy in his chest, and he needed somewhere to put it. Instead, he said, "You do good work." She blinked. "What?" "I don't know what specifically, but this company has 3,000 people in it, and the building functions, which means somebody makes a lot of decisions, right? I figure that's you." She looked at him like he'd said something in a language she hadn't spoken in a long time. "That's a very odd thing to say," she said. "Probably." He picked up his toolbox. "Get some sleep when you can." He walked back down the corridor. Behind him, he heard nothing. No response. Just the quiet hum of the building doing what buildings do. And somewhere in the middle of that, a very controlled woman sitting alone in a desk lamp's worth of light, maybe staring at the door he'd just walked through. Maybe not. He took the elevator up and went back to work, and the weight in his chest was still there. But it was a different kind of weight now. Less like a stone and more like something that had decided it was going to matter, whether he was ready for it or not. He didn't sleep well that morning. That wasn't unusual. His sleep had been patchy for years, ever since Lily was born, and his body permanently rewired itself to run on less of everything. But this was different. He lay in bed with the curtains drawn against the daylight and stared at the ceiling and kept hearing that voice through the thin wall. She's not capable anymore. The accident changed her. And then the other one. She used to be something. Used to be. Like she was already past tense, like they'd already written the ending and were just waiting on the paperwork. He turned over, closed his eyes, thought about Lily, who would be up in 2 hours and would want pancakes and would probably try to put chocolate chips in them without asking, the way she always did, sneaking them in from the bag she kept hidden behind the cereal boxes as if he didn't know exactly where she put it. He thought about Mrs. Parks' persimmons and the stripped screw holes in the storage room cabinet and the water pressure on 16. He did not sleep. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his hands around the mug and thought about Sophia Bennett, sitting alone under a desk lamp in a building she'd turned into a fortress. 3 weeks, one of the men had said. She'd been in that building for 3 weeks without leaving. Ethan had done long stretches before, back in the Navy, when deployment meant weeks in a steel hull with no sky and no stillness, and the constant mechanical noise of a ship doing what ships do. He'd learned to be okay with enclosed spaces, with limited options, with the particular exhaustion of being somewhere you couldn't fully leave. He hadn't liked it, but he'd understood the logic of it. What Sophia was doing wasn't the same. He understood that too, even without having the full picture. She wasn't staying because she had to. She was staying because outside the building felt more dangerous than inside it. He didn't know what had happened to her in the accident. He didn't know what she'd lost or how she'd rebuilt around the loss, or how thoroughly the rebuilding had collapsed. All he knew was what he'd seen. A woman who sat in a doorway and watched someone fix broken things like it was the most steadying sight in the world. He drank his coffee. He picked Lily up from school. She had chocolate chips in her pockets. He could see the outline of the bag. And he didn't say anything about it, just kissed the top of her head and put her in the truck and let her tell him about the whale and the math worksheet for the 4th time. He was back at Asterion by 11:45. The building at night had a rhythm he'd memorized by now. The way the lobby guard, a thick man named Dennis who always smelled like menthol cough drops, gave him a chin nod without looking up from his phone. The elevator with the slightly slower door on the left. The third floor, which always smelled like someone had microwaved fish sometime in the last decade, and the smell had never quite left the walls. He started on the second floor tonight. Nothing dramatic, a ceiling tile that had buckled from a slow leak that had since been fixed, a bathroom exhaust fan that had stopped exhausting. He worked through it methodically, the way he did everything, and let his hands keep busy while the rest of him stayed somewhere else. At 1:30, he took the elevator to 14. He told himself he had tickets on 14. He did have tickets on 14. A door hinge issue on the south side, and something wrong with a motion sensor near the copy room. Those were real. He wasn't manufacturing reasons. The light in the CEO office was on. The door was closed. He hesitated at the elevator, then walked the corridor anyway, went to the south door hinge, crouched down to look at it. It was a minor thing. The pin had worked itself loose over months of use, letting the door sag slightly on the frame. He tightened it, tested it, tightened it again. Maybe 4 minutes of work. He was packing up his tools when the office door at the end of the corridor opened and she came out. Not all the way out. She stopped in the threshold the way she usually did, one hand resting on the wheel, looking at him with that expression she had, the one that was doing several things at once without fully committing to any of them. "You're early," she said. "Late, actually. I started at second floor tonight." Most people start at the top. Most people have never worked in a building where the basement has 3 ongoing issues that nobody's bothered to put on the log. He put his wrench back in the box. "How'd you know where I usually start?" She didn't answer that directly. The motion sensor near the copy room is intermittent. It goes out every time the temperature drops below 68 on this side of the building. Facilities has been looking at the wrong sensor for 6 months. He straightened up and looked at her. "How do you know it's the wrong sensor?" "Because I read the maintenance reports." "The full reports?" "Every week." He stared at her for a moment. "Why?" Something shifted in her face. Not embarrassment exactly, but something adjacent to it. "The building functions because of 1,000 small decisions that nobody in the executive suite thinks about. I like to know what's actually holding things together." It was a reasonable answer. It was also, he was starting to understand, only the surface layer of the real answer. He let it go. "Show me the sensor," he said. "What?" She led him to the copy room, or rather, she moved and he followed, which felt like an important distinction somehow. The motion sensor was mounted near the ceiling in the far corner, a small white disc that controlled the lights in this section of the floor. He climbed his stepladder and looked at it, then looked at the one she pointed to, and she was right. The wiring on the first sensor was fine, but the second one had a microfracture in the mounting bracket that was causing it to shift position by 0.5 centimeter every time the temperature changed, just enough to throw off the detection angle. "How did you spot this?" he said from the top of the ladder. "I couldn't sleep one night. I was rolling through this section and the lights kept cutting out. I sat here for an hour figuring out the pattern." "An hour?" "I had time." He replaced the bracket, realigned the sensor, climbed down. He tested it twice. The lights held. "That's been on the log for, I want to say 4 months, he said. 5. She said it without any particular inflection, but he heard the edge underneath it. 5 months of a simple problem going unsolved because nobody had been curious enough or careful enough or just awake enough at the right moment. He gathered his tools. She stayed near the doorway, watching him the way she always did. That quiet, concentrated attention that he was slowly getting used to, that he had stopped finding unsettling and had started finding, if he was being honest with himself, something else entirely. "You've been here every night since I started noticing," he said. He didn't make it an accusation, just a fact. "I work late hours. Every night for more than 3 weeks now, from what I can tell." He looked at her. "That's not working late. That's something else." She held his gaze. Her hands were still on the wheels, relaxed, but her shoulders had gone slightly tight in a way that probably wasn't obvious to most people. "You're very observant for a maintenance worker," she said. "You're very evasive for someone who reads maintenance reports." A beat. Then, not a smile, not quite, but something that could have been the beginning of one. "Fair," she said. He didn't push it. He'd learned already that pushing with her was the wrong tool for the job. You asked, and then you waited, and sometimes she told you things, and sometimes she didn't, and both outcomes were hers to make. They walked back toward the corridor together, him carrying his toolbox, her rolling beside him, the building quiet and steady around them. My daughter thinks I work in a spaceship, he said, because I leave when it's dark and come back when it's dark. She asked me once if I could see stars from up here. Sophia glanced toward the windows at the end of the corridor. Can you? Sometimes. On a clear night, from the upper floors, you can see a few past the light pollution. He paused. I took a picture once and sent it to her. She put it on her wall. Sophia was quiet for a moment. What's her name again? Lily. How old? 7. Going on 35. He shook his head. She came home last week and told me her math teacher was emotionally unavailable. 7 years old. Sophia looked at him. Where did she learn that phrase? I genuinely do not know. I'm a little scared to ask. And this time it was a smile. Small, quick, slightly startled, like it had escaped before she could decide whether to allow it. She caught it and pulled it back almost immediately, but he'd seen it, and something in his chest did a thing he didn't have a name for and chose not to examine too closely. They reached the door of her office. She slowed. Thank you, she said, for the sensor. That's what I'm here for. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back up at him. The lamp inside was still on, throwing its warm, low light through the glass. Ethan, she said. His name in her mouth sounded more deliberate than it had any reason to. Yeah. The people you heard last night. She said it evenly. In the wall. He went very still. The conference room on 15 has bad insulation, she said. I know, because I've sat in that conference room during winter and nearly frozen through a 3-hour board meeting. She paused. I also know because I was watching the security feed. I saw which room you were in. I saw when you stopped moving. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. I need to know, she said, what you heard. He told her. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, because that was how it had been sitting in him. Not as a neat narrative, but as a collection of fragments that each carried their own specific weight. The voices through the wall, the words they'd used. She's not capable anymore. The mention of a psychological assessment. Thursday's deadline, 7 of 11 votes. He kept his voice level. He didn't editorialize. He just gave her what he had, the same way he'd describe a broken circuit. Here's what I found. Here's what it means. Here's the part that's wrong. She listened without interrupting. She sat very still, the way she did when she was absorbing something she didn't like, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Halverson, she said finally. That was one of the names. Richard Halverson. He's been on the board for 9 years. She said it flatly, like she was reading from a file. I gave him that seat. Ethan didn't say anything. The psychological assessment is new, she said. I knew about the vote. I didn't know they'd fabricated a paper trail. She looked at her hands, which were resting in her lap with a stillness that probably required effort. That changes things. It's fraud, Ethan said. I know what it is. So you can fight it. She looked at him. Her expression was complicated in a way he couldn't fully map. Not hopeless exactly, but not close to confident either. Something worn down in the middle of it. Fighting it requires evidence. Evidence requires access to systems I've been quietly locked out of over the last 3 weeks. HR files, financial audit logs, internal communications. She shook her head. They've been careful. They knew I'd look. Did they delete it? Moved it. Archived in places they assumed I wouldn't think to look. A beat. Or that I don't have the technical access to reach. He thought about that. What about surveillance recordings? She looked at him. What about them? The conference room on 15. If the audio's this clear through the wall, then the room's mics are going to pick up everything said in there, including last night. He paused. Building security records and archives, everything. I've seen the system. It's got a 90-day rolling storage on the server rack in the basement. Nothing gets overwritten for 3 months. She stared at him. I go through that server rack twice a week, he said. I know what's on it. You can access the security archive? Maintenance has baseline access to building systems. Not the secure network, but the physical infrastructure, power, climate, security hardware. The server rack is physical infrastructure. He set his toolbox down. I can't pull files off the corporate network. But the surveillance system is a separate box. It runs on building management software. I've seen it. I've rebooted it twice. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not quite hope, but something that was trying to get there. The recordings from last night, she said slowly, are on that rack, with 90 days of everything else. A silence. The building settled around them, its small, quiet sounds. The climate system, the hum of distant servers, a door somewhere closing on a floor above. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He thought about the right answer. He could give her the practical one, that fraud was wrong, that what those men were doing was illegal, that it was simple. And those things were true. But she deserved the real one, because someone said you used to be something, he said. And they said it like it was over, and it bothered me. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her jaw worked slightly, like she was chewing on something she wasn't ready to swallow. "I need those recordings," she said. "I know." He didn't pull them that night. He needed to be careful. Not sneaky, not exactly, but deliberate. Maintenance access to the building system was legitimate. Pulling surveillance footage and handing it to an executive in an internal power dispute was something else, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He needed to know exactly what he was doing and why before he did it. He spent the next 2 nights working through it in his head, the way he'd been trained to approach a problem he hadn't seen before. Slow, methodical, from every angle. He talked to nobody about it. He went through his normal rounds. He fixed a cracked pipe coupling on 9, replaced a burned-out panel on 22, spent 4 hours on a Friday night tracing an electrical fault through a conduit run that turned out to have 3 separate failure points, all of them caused by the same cheap junction box that had been installed a decade ago and should have been replaced 5 years later. He was good at finding things people had missed. He thought about that. On the 4th night, he went to the basement. The server rack for building management was in a room adjacent to the main mechanical space, not the corporate network infrastructure, which lived on its own locked floor, but the building operations system, HVAC controls, elevator monitoring, power distribution, physical access logs, and the security camera archive. It was a rack he knew well. He opened the access panel, connected his maintenance tablet to the monitoring port, and navigated to the archive directory. The system was straightforward. Cameras indexed by floor and position, time-stamped by hour. He found the 15th floor, the conference room cluster, and scrolled back 4 days. The folder was there. He didn't open it in the basement. He copied the relevant timestamp range to a clean drive. His own drive, which he carried for pulling diagnostic data and which he had every right to use for that purpose, and logged the access in his maintenance record the way he logged everything, because that was how he worked. And because if this ever came to anything, he wanted a clean trail. He went back upstairs. He went to 14. The light was on. She heard him coming. She always did. "I have something," he said from the corridor. She came to the door. He held up the drive. She looked at it, then at him. "Come inside," she said. He stepped into the CEO's office for the first time. It was not what he expected. He'd built a picture in his head from what he'd seen through the glass. Orderly, controlled, sparse. The reality was more complicated. There were takeout containers stacked neatly on one corner of the credenza, a blanket folded on the couch along the far wall, a pillow half hidden behind it, a phone charger plugged into a strip under the desk. Small signs everywhere of someone who had made a temporary situation last much longer than intended and had been too stubborn to admit that was what it had become. Sophia's main monitor was still on, showing a spreadsheet full of figures he didn't try to read. Beside the keyboard, a half-eaten granola bar, still in its wrapper. He noticed all of this in the way he noticed things that needed fixing. Not with judgment, just with attention. She plugged the drive in. He stood back and let her work. She was fast. Whatever else had happened in the last 2 years, she hadn't lost that. The speed, the focus, the way she moved through data with a certainty that didn't require effort. She found the recording inside of 2 minutes, synced it to her internal review software, pulled on a pair of headphones. He watched her face while she listened. It didn't collapse. That was the first thing. He'd half expected it to, because hearing something that's already happened described in someone else's words is one thing, and hearing the actual voices is another. But her face stayed controlled, stayed even, and only in her jaw and the slight set of her mouth could he see what the recording was doing to her. She listened for 11 minutes. Then she pulled the headphones off and set them on the desk and sat very still. "Richard Halverson," she said. "James Corley. And the third voice is Owen Park. He's the general counsel. 3 of them, with 7 board votes behind them." She looked at the monitor. "But this," she stopped. "This isn't a corporate dispute anymore. Filing a falsified psychological assessment is a felony. Using forged documents in a shareholder vote is securities fraud." Her voice was steady, factual. But underneath it, something was moving that he couldn't quite see. "They went further than I thought." "What does that mean for you?" She looked at him. "It means I have to stop sitting in this office and do something about it." She said it like it was simple, like it was obvious. But her hands on the wheels of the chair were slightly white at the knuckles, and he saw that too. "Okay," he said. "It also means this recording can't stay on a maintenance drive. I need to get it to my legal team, carefully, without alerting the 3 people currently controlling my internal communications access." She thought for a moment. "I have an attorney outside the company. She's handled Asterian matters before, but she's independent. If I reach her directly..." "Do you have a personal phone?" "Yes." She looked at him. "Yes, I have a personal phone. I've just..." She stopped again. "I haven't been making a lot of calls." He didn't ask why. He knew why. When you've gone far enough into the kind of silence she'd been living in, calling people felt like surfacing. And surfacing was its own kind of risk, because then they'd see where you'd been. "Call her tonight," he said. "It's 2 a.m. "You said she's your attorney. She'll pick up." Something moved in Sophia's expression. A small resistance, and then the resistance giving way. "Yes," she said. "She will." He reached out and picked up his empty drive from the desk. She'd already copied what she needed. "I'll clean my access log in the system and note it as a routine diagnostic pull." Which it was. He paused. "Everything I did tonight is covered by my maintenance access scope. Everything you do with that recording is yours." She looked up at him. "You're protecting yourself." "I'm protecting the evidence. There's a difference." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once, slowly. "Thank you, Ethan." He picked up his toolbox. He was almost at the door when she spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" He stopped. "Your daughter, Lily." She said the name carefully, like she wanted to make sure she had it right. "When everything is hard, when you're tired and the money's short, and she needs things you don't know how to give her, how do you keep going?" He turned back to look at her. She wasn't asking it as a throwaway. She was asking it the way someone asks a question they've been carrying for a long time without anywhere to put it. He thought about the honest answer. Not the clean one, not the version that made him sound like he had it figured out, but the real one. "Most of the time I don't feel like I'm keeping going," he said. "Most of the time I just feel like I'm not stopping. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hands had relaxed slightly on the wheels. "Not stopping," she repeated quietly, like she was trying it out. "It's enough," he said, usually. He left her there with her phone and her recordings, and whatever she was going to do with the information that her own counsel had betrayed her, and he took the elevator up and worked through the rest of his rounds and thought about her voice, asking that question in the low lamplight, and the way not stopping was sometimes the whole of bravery and the whole of love and the whole of everything worth doing, assembled from nothing except the refusal to quit. By the time he drove home in the early gray of morning, Lily was still asleep, and Mrs. Park had left a note on his door that said, "Persimmons are early this year," with a small drawing of a fruit beside it that he thought was meant to be a persimmon, but looked more like a surprised peach. He stuck it on the refrigerator. He didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee and thought about all the things that were now in motion, and how motion, once started, had its own logic, its own direction, regardless of whether you were ready for where it was heading. He was not at all sure he was ready. He was also not, he realized, going to stop. The attorney's name was Claire Weston, and she called back at 6:45 in the morning. Ethan was home by then, sitting at his kitchen table with his second cup of coffee going cold, half watching the morning light move across the linoleum floor in the slow way it did in October when the sun came in low and sideways through the east window. His phone wasn't the one that rang. He wouldn't know about Claire Weston until later. But the call happened. Sophia made it the way he'd told her to. And whatever was said in that conversation set something in motion that could not be walked back. He found out that night. He came in at the usual time, nodded at Dennis at the security desk, took the elevator up, started on 7. There was a water heater on 7 that had been running 5 degrees too hot for a month and throwing off the temperature calibration for the whole east side of the floor. He traced it back to a faulty thermostat sensor and replaced it, checked the calibration, logged it. Standard work. Hands busy, mind elsewhere. By 1:30 he was on 14. The light was on. The door was already open. Sophia was at her desk, not in the doorway. She was actually working, screens up, both of them. Whatever she'd been doing spread across the monitors in a way that looked like it had been going for hours. She looked up when he came down the corridor, and something in her face was different. Not relaxed. He didn't think she did relaxed, not as a default, but less compressed, like a fist that had opened slightly. "You made the call," he said. "I made the call." She pulled off her reading glasses. He hadn't seen those before, wire-framed, slightly bent on one side, and set them on the desk. "Claire drove in from Greenwich at 7 this morning. We met in a parking garage 2 blocks from here because I didn't want her coming into the building." Smart. She nearly had a stroke when she heard the recording. Sophia's mouth curved slightly. Claire doesn't have strokes. She has controlled reactions that she describes as strokes to make people feel better. In this case, I think it was genuine. What did she say? That we have enough for criminal referrals on all 3 of them, Halverson, Corley, and Owen Park. She said each name with a flat precision that told him she'd been saying them to herself all day, turning them over, getting used to the feel of them as something other than colleagues. The falsified psychological assessment alone is a felony. The coordinated board manipulation using forged documentation is securities fraud. She's already contacted federal counsel. Ethan sat down on the edge of the small chair near the door, not settling in, just taking the weight off his feet for a minute. How fast does that move? Slower than I'd like. Federal anything moves on its own schedule. She turned her chair slightly, angling toward him. But there's a complication. The shareholder meeting. She looked at him. You know about that? I heard a date. Thursday. It's been moved up. It's now Monday. She said it without raising her voice, but he could hear the thing underneath it. The calculation, the pressure, the weight of a clock that had just started running faster. They got 3 additional board members to agree to the emergency session. 10 of 11 now. They're calling it a performance review, which is a procedural mechanism that allows them to bypass the normal 60-day notice period. If the vote passes Monday, my removal is immediate and binding. That's 4 days? Yes. And federal counsel cannot move in 4 days. Not for a case this size. She picked up a pen, turned it in her fingers once, set it back down. Claire is filing for an emergency injunction to delay the vote. She'll argue procedural irregularities in the meeting notice. There are some, she found 3 in the first hour, but injunctions against corporate governance actions are hard to get quickly, and the judge assigned to the commercial docket this week is... She stopped. He's not favorable to that kind of argument. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What do you need? More. She said it simply. I have the recording from the conference room. But that's one conversation. One night. To go in front of an emergency injunction hearing and also survive a federal fraud investigation simultaneously, I need documentation of the pattern. The forged assessment has to exist somewhere. Internal communications about the plan, emails, memos, anything that shows this was coordinated over time and not just one meeting. On the corporate network, which I've been locked out of, selectively. They've been careful about it. I still have nominal access to most things, but the specific directories where compliance documentation lives, the board communication archive, HR's external consultant records, those have had my credentials quietly degraded over the last 3 weeks. You noticed? I notice everything about this building. She said it without heat, just fact. I've been choosing not to act on most of it. He looked at her. She met the look and didn't look away, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. I need someone inside the physical network infrastructure, she said, not the corporate data. I'm not asking you to hack anything, but the server room on 18, the one that's restricted access. I don't have clearance for that room. You have clearance for the power management systems that serve that room, and the climate control, and the cable management infrastructure. She held his gaze. The server room on 18 was rewired 14 months ago when they expanded the rack space. It was a maintenance project. Your department did the work. He thought about that. He thought about the cable run from that project. He hadn't done it personally, but he'd reviewed the documentation when he came on, the way he did with all prior work, because prior work was where current problems were buried. There's a physical access log for that room, he said. Security controlled, keycard, and biometric. Yes. Even if I got into the infrastructure corridor adjacent to the server room, I can't pull files off the corporate network. That's not maintenance access. That's something else entirely. I know, she paused. I'm not asking you to pull anything. I'm asking you to tell me if the physical infrastructure gives me anything I can use. She leaned forward slightly. The server room on 18 was originally designed with an out-of-band management port, a physical terminal connection for emergency admin access that bypasses the main network authentication. It was supposed to be disabled when they upgraded the security architecture 2 years ago. He looked at her. Was it? I don't know. The project was signed off by Owen Park's department. Owen Park, the general counsel, one of the 3 men on the recording. If it wasn't disabled, Sophia said carefully, and if that terminal is physically accessible from the infrastructure corridor, then it would allow direct access to the system without going through the credentialing layer that's been modified. That's a significant if. Yes. Ethan looked at the floor for a moment. He thought about the 14 months of cable documentation in his files. He thought about Owen Park signing off on a security upgrade. He thought about the difference between a thing that was supposed to be done and a thing that had actually been done, and how often those two things weren't the same, and how most of the time the gap between them lived quietly in a wall somewhere until someone with a flashlight went looking. I'd need to check the infrastructure corridor, he said, which I have access to, legitimately. I know. If the port is there, if it was never disabled, you'd need to be the one to use it, not me. That has to be you, with your own credentials, on your own authority as CEO. Agreed. And you'd need to get to 18. Physically. He paused. Which means leaving 14. The room went quiet in a specific way. Not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind that had weight in it. Sophia looked at the window. The city was out there, dark and lit at the same time the way cities are at 2 in the morning, and he watched her look at it the way someone looks at water when they're not sure about the temperature. Yes, she said. It means that. He checked the corridor the next night. He had 2 legitimate tickets on 18, a thermostat sensor near the copy cluster and a cable tray that had been improperly secured during a recent installation and was starting to sag. He took care of both of them first, fully, correctly, logging each one with timestamps and notes, because that was how he worked. And because if his presence on that floor was ever questioned, he wanted the paperwork to be unimpeachable. Then he found the infrastructure corridor. It ran behind the main server room, accessible through a utility door that required only the building management keycard, the same one that got him into mechanical spaces throughout the building. The corridor was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, lined with cable trays and power conduit, warm from the heat that bled through the server room wall. He'd been in spaces like this 100 times. He knew how to move through them, knew what to look for and what to ignore. He found the management port 11 minutes in. It was mounted low on the wall behind a swing-out cable bracket that had been left unlatched, probably for years, given the dust on the hinge. A physical terminal port, old hardware, the the kind that predated the current security architecture by at least a decade. It had not been disabled. There was no cap on it, no lockout, no decommission tag, just a port sitting there, forgotten by whoever had been supposed to remember it, waiting quietly in the dark the way unfixed things did. He took a picture with his phone for documentation. He made a note in his maintenance log. Infrastructure corridor, server room 18. Legacy terminal port, out-of-band management hardware. Status, active/decommissioned. Flagging for security team review, accurate, completely accurate. He was, legitimately, flagging it for review. He got back to 14 at 2:20. It's there, he said. She closed her eyes for a half second. Not relief, not exactly, but something releasing that had been held very tight. Undecommissioned, he said. Active hardware. You'd have physical access through the infrastructure corridor, which I can document as an escorted maintenance inspection. There's a legitimate reason to have you present for a cable tray safety review. A CEO doing a facilities walkthrough isn't unusual. In the middle of the night it is. Less unusual than you'd think. I've had executives on night walkthroughs before. Twice. Both times it was someone who wanted to see the building without other people watching. He paused. I document it the same way. Routine. Nothing flagged. She was looking at him with that expression, the layered one, the one that was doing too many things to read cleanly. You've thought about this carefully. I think about things carefully. It's most of the job. She was quiet for a moment. If we do this, if I get into that system and pull what's there, they'll know I was on 18. Building access logs. The keycard readers record every entry. Yes, that could be used against me, to argue I was accessing systems improperly. You're the CEO. You have access to the entire building by definition. Your keycard doesn't have floor restrictions. I checked the access profile in the building management system. It's unrestricted. He looked at her steadily. There's nothing improper about you being on any floor of your own building. She absorbed that. He watched her turn it over, check it from different angles the way she did with everything, looking for the weak point, the thing that would break under pressure. When? She said. Tomorrow night, before the weekend. We need time before Monday. She nodded once, slowly. Okay. Okay, he said. No. He didn't tell Lily anything, obviously, but she knew something was off. She had a radar for his mood that still surprised him, even after 7 years of evidence that it existed. She watched him over breakfast the next morning with that particular 7-year-old intensity, the kind that doesn't have the social layer yet that adults use to pretend they're not watching. You have your thinking face, she said. I always have my thinking face. No, you have the other thinking face, the one where you think about something that's not us. He looked at her. She was eating cereal and looking at him with absolute seriousness, spoon in hand, like this was a reasonable thing to say to a person over breakfast. Work stuff, he said. Is it broken? Sort of. Can you fix it? He thought about the infrastructure corridor, the port in the wall, Sophia's hands on her wheels in the lamplight. I think so, he said. Probably. Lily considered this and apparently found it acceptable because she went back to her cereal. Mrs. Park says you worry too much, she said. When were you discussing me with Mrs. Park? Yesterday. She gave me a persimmon. She paused. It tasted weird. Persimmons do that. Why do people eat them? They get better. She looked skeptical. That's what you said about mushrooms. You like mushrooms now. I like some mushrooms, under protest. She stood up, picked up her bowl, carried it to the sink, something she'd started doing without being asked about 2 weeks ago, which he'd noticed and not commented on because commenting would jinx it. Dad? Yeah. If something's broken at work, you should fix it, because that's your job, and you're good at it. He looked at his daughter, who was 7 years old and had flour on her pajama sleeve from something that had happened at some point he hadn't witnessed, and felt the specific chest tightening that came from being loved simply, without agenda, by someone who didn't know how rare that was. Yeah, he said. Okay. Japam. That night felt different from the others. Ethan couldn't have explained exactly how. The building was the same. The routine was the same. Dennis at the desk with his menthol cough drops, the elevator with the slow left door, the particular smell of 3 and 7, and the climate-controlled stillness of the upper floors. But something in the air had a charge to it, the way air gets before a storm when the pressure drops and everything goes very still in a way that isn't peace. He did his rounds on 12 and 13. He was thorough. He took his time. At 1:15, he texted Sophia. They'd exchanged numbers 3 nights ago, practically, without any ceremony, and said, "Ready when you are." She replied 4 minutes later, "Give me 10 minutes." He went to the elevator and waited. She came out of 14 at 1:32. He heard the elevator open before he saw her, the soft mechanical sigh of the doors, and then she was in the lobby of the 14th floor in her chair, wearing her blazer and her work clothes, still in what had been yesterday's outfit, if he had to guess, but pulled together, deliberate, the way someone dresses when they've decided something. She looked at him across the lobby. He looked at her. "I haven't been above 14 in 3 weeks," she said. "I know. I'm aware that's—" She stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need her to. 18 is 3 floors up, he said. "The corridor is warm and narrow, and you'll need to watch the cable tray on the left side because it's lower than it should be. I'll be right behind you." She nodded. They took the elevator to 8. The floor was empty and dark the way all the upper floors were at this hour, the kind of dark that wasn't complete, emergency lighting, screensavers on a few monitors that hadn't timed out yet, the glow of equipment indicators through the server room's small window. Ethan went first with his flashlight, moving through the space with the ease of someone who'd been in it many times, and Sophia followed, her chair quiet on the smooth floor. She was looking around. He realized, watching her take in the floor, the equipment, the layout of a space she hadn't physically occupied in weeks, that she was doing the thing she'd been doing with the maintenance reports, but with her own body in her own building. Relearning the shape of it. He didn't comment on that. He took her to the utility door, badged in with his building management card, and held it while she came through. The infrastructure corridor was tight. He'd been thinking about that, whether the chair would fit, and it did, but only barely, with maybe 6 inches on each side. He went ahead and she followed, and he moved the cable bracket out of the way before she reached it. The port was where he'd found it. Small, dusty, unremarkable. He shone the light on it. Sophia pulled her chair as close as the corridor allowed. She looked at the port for a moment without speaking. Then she reached into the bag on the back of her chair and took out a laptop and a short cable. "You came prepared," he said. "I've been prepared since you told me it was there." She connected the cable. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently, over the keyboard in a way that made it clear that whatever else the accident had taken from her, it hadn't taken this. Ethan stood back in the corridor and did what he did well, which was wait. The narrow space was warm and quiet. He could hear the servers on the other side of the wall, that constant controlled white noise of machines doing enormous things invisibly. He thought about Lily asleep at home, about Mrs. Parks Persimmons, about the bills on the kitchen table. He thought about what came after Monday, whatever Monday brought, and how much of it was now out of his hands. "Got it," Sophia said quietly. He looked over. Her screen was lit, showing a directory structure, deep system files, compliance archives, the kind of documentation that didn't live on the active network, but in the long-term storage that every company maintained and hoped nobody ever needed to look at. She was already navigating. He watched her pull up the external consultant records first, the HR files that referenced the psychological assessment, and what she found there made her jaw tighten visibly. "It's real," she said. "The document exists. It's dated 6 weeks ago. The signature on it belongs to a Dr. Marcus Fine. I've never heard that name, never been evaluated by anyone named Fine, never authorized any psychological assessment." She copied it. "And here," her voice dropped by half a register, "here is the invoice, paid from the corporate discretionary fund, authorized by Owen Park, 3 weeks before the assessment was filed." 3 weeks. The same 3 weeks she'd spent inside these walls. "They planned this before you ever came back to the building," Ethan said. "Yes." Her voice was very even. They were planning it while I was still in the rehabilitation facility, which means this wasn't reactive. This wasn't about my performance after the accident. This was always the plan. She paused. They were waiting for me to be vulnerable enough. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. She kept pulling files, email chains, internal, partially deleted, but recoverable from the archive, showing Halverson and Corley coordinating with an external board strategy consultant about the timing of the removal. Memos drafted but never officially sent, living in the drafts archive of a shared administrative account. A spreadsheet someone had made tracking shareholder voting intentions, with handwritten-looking annotations in a column marked "confirmed" next to 10 names. She copied everything, methodically, completely. It took 40 minutes. Ethan stood in the corridor and watched the cable tray on the left, which was sagging about 2 inches lower than it should have been, and thought about how he was going to write that up in the maintenance log. When she was done, she disconnected the cable and put the laptop away. She sat for a moment in the warm corridor, looking at nothing. "Sophia," he said. She looked up. "Are you okay?" She thought about that for a moment in the way she thought about everything, actually considering it, not just reaching for the automatic answer. "No," she said, "but I'm also not—" She stopped. "I'm not nothing, which is different from how I felt 3 weeks ago." He nodded. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've been so afraid of what they could do to me that I forgot what I could do to them." "They forgot it too," he said. "That's their problem." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not some movie moment transformation. Just a small, genuine change, the kind that happened in real faces when something real landed somewhere it was needed. "Let's get out of this corridor," she said. "My neck is cramping." Claire Weston had the files by 3 in the morning. Sophia sent them encrypted from her personal phone with a summary document she'd drafted in the elevator on the way back down. Ethan knew this because Sophia told him, standing in the corridor outside her office while the lamp behind her threw its usual warm, low light across the floor. "She'll have everything to federal counsel by morning," Sophia said. "And the emergency injunction filing is ready to go the moment the courthouse opens. With this documentation, the procedural argument becomes much stronger. They can show the meeting notice irregularities weren't isolated. They were part of a coordinated pattern of bad faith governance." "Monday is still close," he said. "Yes, but close is different from too late." He looked at her. She was tired, genuinely, visibly tired, the kind of tired that 3 weeks of living in an office produces and that no amount of controlled posture could fully hide. There were shadows under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that had probably been there so long it had stopped feeling like tension and had started feeling like her regular shape. "You should sleep," he said. "I know. There's a couch in there." "I'm aware. I've been sleeping on it." She looked at him with a dry expression that was several degrees warmer than her default. "It's an excellent couch if you're 5 feet tall. I am not 5 feet tall." "I have a daughter who's been asking about the couch in the CEO's office specifically," he said. "I will not be confirming this." She laughed. It was a real one, brief, slightly surprised, escaping before she'd made any decision about it. The sound of it did something to the hallway that he couldn't quantify. "What does Lily know about the CEO's office?" she said. "Nothing. But she knows I spend time on 14, and she asked if the fancy offices have fancy couches. I told her probably." He paused. "She has a theory that executives sleep on clouds. Tell her the reality is deeply disappointing. She'll be fine. She already knows about persimmons." Sophia looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the one she wore when something surprised her into warmth, when her guard moved without her telling it to. She let it sit there for a moment, this time, instead of taking it back. "Ethan," she said, "whatever happens Monday, whatever the injunction does or doesn't do, I need you to know that what you did, the recording, the corridor, tonight, I couldn't have done any of it without you. You would have found another way. Maybe. Eventually." She shook her head slightly. "But I was running out of eventually." He thought about that, about what it meant to run out of eventually, the specific quiet desperation of it, not dramatic, just slow, like a tide going out and not coming back. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow night." "I know," she said, and the way she said it, simply, steadily, like it was a thing she could count on, made it sound different from every other time those words had been spoken in that building by anyone. He took the elevator down. The city outside was doing what it always did at 4 in the morning, which was everything and nothing at once, lit up and dark at the same time, full of people sleeping and people awake, and people somewhere in between. He drove home. The truck's heater was making a sound it hadn't made last week, something slightly rhythmic behind the fan, and he made a note to look at it on the weekend. Mrs. Park had left the light on in her window, which she sometimes did when she knew he'd be late, though she would never admit that's what it was for. He went in. Lily was asleep, one arm hanging off the side of the bed, her whale drawing visible on the wall above the desk, the one she'd made to explain subtraction to a teacher who didn't understand fish. He stood in her doorway for a minute and watched her breathe, the way he used to do when she was a newborn and he was terrified and didn't know what he was doing. Except now she was 7, and he still didn't always know what he was doing. But the terror had changed shape, and the love had gotten bigger, and somehow that arithmetic made more sense than anything else in his life. He went to bed. He set an alarm for the afternoon because Saturday was a school day for Lily, and also laundry day, and also possibly the day he needed to look at the truck's heater, and Monday was coming whether he was ready or not. He was not ready. He was, he decided, not stopping. That would have to be sufficient. The injunction hearing was Saturday morning. Ethan didn't know that until Saturday afternoon, when Sophia texted him 2 words. "We got it." He was under the truck at the time, lying on a piece of cardboard on the driveway, looking at the source of the rhythmic sound behind the fan, which turned out to be a loose bracket on the blower motor housing, a 20-minute fix, if he had the right bolt, which he did, in the 3rd tray of his toolbox. Lily was sitting on the front step, eating an apple and narrating his progress to nobody in particular. His phone buzzed on the concrete beside him. He picked it up, read the message, set it back down. "Good news?" Lily said. She had the particular radar for tone that came from years of watching him read work-related messages. "Yeah," he said. "Good news." He tightened the bracket, tested the motor by hand, slid out from under the truck. He sat on the curb and read the full message. The emergency injunction had been granted. The Monday shareholder meeting was postponed pending a judicial review of the meeting notice procedures. Claire Weston had argued procedural bad faith, supported by the documentation from the server archive, and the judge, despite Sophia's earlier concern about his disposition, had found enough substance in the filings to warrant the delay. It bought time. Not resolution, not victory, just time. But time was the thing they'd needed most. He texted back, "Good. Sleep tonight." She replied, after a pause long enough that he was already back under the truck, "I'll try." He believed her, which was more than he would have said a week ago. Sunday was quiet in the way Sundays were supposed to be, and mostly weren't. He took Lily to the park in the afternoon, the one 3 blocks over with the climbing structure she'd declared herself too old for in August, and had been secretly using ever since when she thought he wasn't watching. He sat on a bench and watched her climb it, and pretended not to, and drank bad vending machine coffee, and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill he'd had to relearn after the Navy and had to keep practicing, or it went away. His phone stayed mostly quiet. One message from Sophia at 2 in the afternoon, a single photograph taken through the window of the 14th floor office, looking out over the city. No caption, no explanation, just the view, which was, he had to admit, something. The city spread out in flat October light, all glass and water tower and crowded sky. He didn't know what to say to that, so he sent back, "Stars tonight if it stays clear." She didn't reply for a while. Then, "I'll look." Lily found him on the bench at some point and climbed up beside him without asking, and sat there eating the granola bar from her jacket pocket with the focused energy of someone who had been exerting herself and deserved calories. She looked at his phone screen, which he hadn't put away fast enough, and saw the photograph of the city. "Is that from your building?" she said. "From the 14th floor, yeah. It looks like the whole world." He looked at the picture again. "I guess it does." "Who took it?" "Someone I know." Lily processed this with the lateral intelligence of a 2nd grader who had learned that someone I know was its own category of information. She didn't push it. She ate her granola bar and swung her feet against the bench, and after a minute said, "Can I meet them?" "Maybe," he said. "Is it a lady?" He looked at her. She was already looking back at him with an expression of complete weaponized innocence. "Where did that come from?" he said. "Mrs. Park says you need more friends who are ladies." "I have plenty of friends." "Mrs. Park says Dennis from your job doesn't count." "I like Dennis." "Mrs. Park says Dennis smells like medicine." He opened his mouth and closed it. "Dennis has a condition," he said finally. Lily seemed to accept this as an endpoint and went back to her granola bar. He put his phone in his pocket and watched the light change over the park and tried to figure out when exactly Mrs. Park had become the primary intelligence analyst in his personal life and whether he could do anything about it. He could not do anything about it. He'd accepted that years ago. Monday arrived the way difficult things do, at the same pace as everything else, indifferent to its own significance. Ethan slept through most of it, necessarily, because he worked nights and the world still operated on the assumption that the important things happened during daylight hours. He got Lily up and fed and walked her to school and came back and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for the better part of an hour before finally falling into the thin, unsatisfying sleep of someone who knew something was happening somewhere that he had no control over. He woke at 2 in the afternoon to 3 messages from Sophia, sent over the previous 4 hours. The first, at 10:15. Federal agents arrived at the building this morning. Halverson, Corley, and Park have been asked to surrender their building access badges pending investigation. Board has been notified. The second, at 11:40, emergency board session called for this afternoon. The remaining board members want to address the situation before it goes further into the press cycle. Claire is advising me to attend in person. The third, at 1:50. 7 minutes before he woke up. I'm going in. Whatever happens, I want you to know that you're the reason I'm going in at all. He sat up in bed and read that last one twice. Then he got dressed, poured coffee he didn't fully taste, and sat at the kitchen table and waited, which was all he could do, and which was, in his experience, one of the harder things. The board session was in the main conference room on the 22nd floor. Ethan knew the 22nd floor well. He'd spent time up there over the past 11 months, replaced 2 ceiling tiles, fixed a persistent HVAC issue, rewired a lighting panel after a power surge. He knew which conference room they were talking about without needing to be told. It was the largest one, the one with the floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and east walls, and the long oval table that seated 18, and the particular echo that happened when the room was full and everyone was talking at once. He wasn't there. He was at his kitchen table, then later picking Lily up from school, then making dinner, then helping her with math homework that this time did not involve any marine mammals. Sophia texted him at 4:47. "It's done." He read that and put the phone face down on the table. Lily looked up from her worksheet. "What?" "Nothing. Carry the one." "I know how to carry the one, Dad." "Then why didn't you?" She looked at the worksheet. "I forgot." She picked up her pencil and carried the one. "Is it the lady?" He picked up the phone and looked at it again. "It's done." 2 words, and he couldn't tell from 2 words what done meant, whether it was over in the way they needed it to be over or over in some other way that required a longer conversation. "Finish your homework," he said. She finished her homework. He made pasta, the straightforward kind with jarred sauce because it was Monday, and Monday didn't require ambition, and they ate and she told him about a book her class was reading, and he listened, actually listened, and didn't check his phone again until she was in bed. The follow-up message came at 8:12. Full reinstatement. Board voted 9-2 to confirm my position and referred the matter to the company's outside counsel for internal review, separate from the federal investigation. Halverson resigned at the start of the meeting. Corley and Park were formally removed. "I have my company back." A pause, then, "Can we talk tomorrow?" He read it in the kitchen with the light on low and the sound of Lily breathing in her room down the hall, and something in his chest did something complicated that he was going to have to sit with for a while before he understood it. He typed back, "Yes." "When?" She replied, "Daytime. I want to try daytime for once." She called at 10 the next morning. Her voice on the phone sounded different from how it sounded in the building. Slightly less guarded, or maybe just unguarded in different places, without the physical space of the corridor and the lamp and the closed office to shape things. She sounded like someone who had slept. Not well, probably, but some. "How are you?" he said. It felt like an inadequate opening and also the only honest one. "Strange," she said. "I went outside this morning, just to the front entrance. I stood on the steps for about 4 minutes and then came back in, which I'm aware is not impressive. 4 minutes is a start. It was cold. That was mostly why." "October," he said. "Yes." A pause. The board session was what it needed to be. Claire had everything prepared. The documentation, the recordings, the federal investigation referral. There wasn't much argument left to make by the time we sat down. Halverson walked in, looked at what was on the table, and resigned before the meeting formally opened. Another pause. He didn't look at me. That's its own kind of statement. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The two who voted against my reinstatement, I know who they are, and I know why. They weren't part of the conspiracy. They just genuinely don't think I'm capable anymore. That's a different problem. "You going to prove them wrong?" "I'm going to do my job," she said, "and they can form their own conclusions." Her voice was level, but underneath it he could hear something that wasn't quite defiance and wasn't quite resolve. Something between those two things, personal and tired and real. "That's all I can do." "It's enough," he said. And then, because it seemed like the right moment, "You should get some actual sleep, in an actual bed, off the building." A beat. "I have an apartment," she said. "I haven't been there in 3 weeks." "I know. There might be things that need to be dealt with. Plants, probably. I had plants. How long can a plant survive without water?" "Apparently I'm going to find out." She said it with the dry tone she used when she was hiding something warmer. "Ethan." "Yeah." "I meant what I said, in the text. You're the reason I went into that room Monday. I want you to know that I've been thinking about how to say that properly, and I don't think there's a better way to say it than that." He looked out his kitchen window. The persimmon tree in Mrs. Park's yard was in the early stages of something orange and tentative, the fruit just starting to show. "You went in because you were ready," he said. "I went in because you showed me what not stopping looks like," she said. "Every night, in that building, carrying your toolbox, doing the job, not asking the building to be grateful. I needed to see that." A pause. I'd forgotten what it looked like. He didn't know what to say to that. He sat with it for a moment. "Come have dinner Friday," he said. It came out before he'd fully decided to say it. A silence. Then, "At your apartment?" "It's not an apartment, it's a house. Small. The heater makes a sound. Lily will probably interrogate you and then try to show you her whale drawing." "The subtraction whale. She's told you about that?" "You mentioned it. I've been paying attention." She said it carefully, like she was measuring out the admission. "I'd like that. Friday." "Nothing fancy," he said. "I make pasta or I make soup. Those are basically the options." "Pasta is fine." "Lily's going to have questions. I have answers." "You haven't met Lily's questions." He could hear the shape of a smile in her silence. "Friday," she said. "Pasta, whale drawings. I'll manage." House. He almost told Lily on Wednesday. He got as far as "there's someone coming for dinner Friday," and then Lily looked at him with the expression of someone downloading information at high speed, and he immediately simplified the situation to "a friend from work, and yes, it's a lady," because she was going to ask. And yes, you have to be normal, because she was absolutely not going to be normal. Mrs. Park, informed through the apartment wall by means Ethan had stopped trying to understand, materialized with a jar of homemade kimchi on Thursday evening, and the completely unfounded air of a person who had been instrumental in making something happen. "For Friday," she said, handing it to him. "How do you even know about Friday?" "Lily mentioned it." "When did Lily—" He looked at the kimchi. "She'll probably bring a salad anyway." "She might not," Mrs. Park said, already turning back to her door. You don't know what she's like outside the building. He stood in his doorway with the kimchi and thought about that. He didn't actually know what Sophia was like outside the building. He'd only ever seen her in those specific walls, under that specific light, in that specific kind of privacy that the empty nighttime building provided. He'd seen her in her fortress. He hadn't seen her anywhere else. He was curious about that, in a way that felt different from how he was usually curious about things. But Friday came. She arrived at 6:30, which was when he'd said, and he appreciated that. Some people used arrival time as a negotiating position, and he found that exhausting. She came in her car, the dark sedan with the hand controls, and she parked it on the street and came up the front path and knocked. And Lily, who had been stationed near the door since 6:15, under the pretense of drawing at the kitchen table, answered it before Ethan was fully out of the kitchen. He heard them before he saw them. "Hi," Lily said, flat, assessing. "Hi," Sophia said, equally flat, but with something careful underneath it. "Are you the lady from Dad's building?" "I work there, yes." "Are you his boss?" A brief pause. "In a manner of speaking. He doesn't act like you're his boss." "Lily," Ethan came around the corner and found them in the doorway, Lily blocking it with the unconscious authority of someone who owned the space, Sophia in her chair on the front step, wearing a dark jacket over a lighter shirt, her hair down instead of back. He'd never seen it down before, he realized, and looking at his daughter with an expression he recognized, the layered one, the one doing several things at once, except this time one of the layers was something that looked a lot like delight. "Sorry," he said. She's doing her job," Sophia said, without looking away from Lily. "It's okay." She looked at Lily directly. "I'm Sophia. What's your name?" Lily considered whether to answer this. "Lily," she said finally. "How old are you, Lily?" 7. Almost 8. Almost 8, Sophia nodded seriously. "That's a significant difference." "Dad doesn't think so." Dads often underestimate significance. She glanced up at Ethan briefly, and there was something in that glance that was entirely for him, small and warm and a little bit amused, before she looked back at Lily. "Can I come in? It's cold." Lily stepped aside, which in 7-year-old terms was something close to a formal welcome. The house, Ethan had worried, was going to feel too small. It was small. That was simply its condition. And he'd spent most of Thursday evening unconsciously looking at it through someone else's eyes and noticing things he normally didn't. The scuff on the baseboard near the kitchen, the curtains that had been meaning to be replaced since last spring, the stack of Lily's library books on the coffee table that had been there so long he'd stopped seeing them. Sophia came inside and looked around, and what he saw in her face wasn't the assessment he'd feared. It was something quieter than that. She looked at the kitchen table with Lily's drawing supplies spread across it, at the small shelf of mismatched mugs above the coffee maker, at the photograph of Lily on her first day of kindergarten that he'd put on the wall because it was his favorite picture of her, and he'd wanted to see it every day. She looked at all of it with the specific attention of someone who'd been alone in an office for 3 weeks and had forgotten what ordinary living looked like assembled at scale. "It's warm in here," she said. "The heater runs a little high," he said. "I know how to fix it. I meant..." She stopped. She looked at him. "I meant warm, as in, it feels like people live here." He didn't know how to answer that, so he said, "Pasta's almost ready." She sat at the kitchen table because that was where the accessible space was, and Lily immediately relocated from the couch to the chair across from her and began without preamble the interrogation. Ethan listened from the stove. "Lily, do you know everything about the building?" Sophia, "Most of it." Lily, "Dad knows everything about the insides, like the pipes and the electricity." Sophia, "He does. He's very good at it." Lily, considering, "Do you know each other from fixing things?" Sophia, "Sort of, yes." Lily, "What did you fix?" A pause. "Things that had been broken for a while," Sophia said. "Things that needed someone patient enough to find the problem." Lily absorbed this. Ethan could hear her thinking. "Dad's patient," she said. "He fixed my lamp 3 times before he figured out it was the switch and not the bulb." That sounds right. He said, don't assume you know what's wrong before you look. Good advice. He says it about everything. Bikes, math, people. Another pause, shorter this time. People too? He says most people aren't broken, they're just installed wrong. Lily delivered this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting an established fact. I don't totally get it, but it sounds true. Ethan stirred the sauce and said nothing. He heard Sophia's voice, quieter than it had been. It sounds true to me too. Dinner was pasta and the salad she had in fact brought. He'd been right about that. A simple one in a container from a place he didn't recognize that was almost certainly nicer than anything available near his street. He added Mrs. Park's kimchi to the table without explanation, and Sophia looked at it, and he said, "Neighbor?" And she nodded like that was sufficient, and Lily said she didn't want any, and then ate 2 large spoonfuls when she thought they weren't paying attention. The conversation moved the way dinner conversation moved when one of the participants was 7, in non-linear jumps, doubling back, veering into subjects that had no visible connection to anything that had come before. Lily told Sophia about the whale drawing and the math worksheet and the teacher's reaction, and Sophia listened to all of it with a seriousness that Lily clearly recognized as genuine, because she gave Sophia the full version, the one with all the contextual detail, not the edited version she gave adults she'd already decided weren't worth the full story. So, was the teacher wrong? Sophia asked when Lily finished. Lily thought about it. She wasn't wrong about the math part, she allowed, but she was wrong about the whale part. Because the whale was relevant. Because it made more sense to me. Lily picked up her fork. Some things need a picture. Sophia looked at her for a moment. Some things do, she said. After dinner, Lily produced the whale drawing from her room. She'd been planning this clearly, had it ready in a specific place, and put it on the table. Sophia looked at it with full attention, not the quick, approving glance that adults gave children's artwork to make them feel good about it, but actual looking, the kind Ethan had seen her give the maintenance reports, and the server directory, and the faces of people she was trying to understand. The whale is very determined, Sophia said. Lily brightened. He's eating a lot of fish, that's the subtraction part. How many does he start with? 47. He eats 32. That's the answer. She pointed. These are the fish he already ate. I did small ones because there wasn't room. That's efficient use of space. Lily looked at her with the expression of someone who had not expected to be complimented on spatial efficiency by a grown-up. Thank you, she said. You're a good explainer, Sophia said. Some people make things complicated when they don't need to be. You don't do that. Lily considered this for a moment. Then she said, with the devastating directness of children who have decided they like someone, you can keep it if you want. Something crossed Sophia's face that Ethan hadn't seen before, quick and unguarded, there and gone in the space of a second. She looked at the drawing, then at Lily. You made this. I made it for my teacher. She didn't really want it. Lily shrugged. You want it more. Sophia took the drawing. She held it for a moment. Thank you, Lily. You're welcome. Lily stood up, apparently satisfied that the important business of the evening had concluded, and announced that she was going to get her pajamas on, and disappeared down the hall. Ethan and Sophia sat at the kitchen table in the quiet that Lily left behind, which was a specific kind of quiet, more comfortable than most. She's extraordinary, Sophia said. She's a lot, he said. That's the same thing, mostly. He picked up the dishes and took them to the sink, and she brought her own plate over without being asked, coming to the end of the counter where she could set it in the basin. And for a moment they were just 2 people standing in a kitchen the way people stood in kitchens, which was close and ordinary and without any of the particular weight of the last 3 weeks. How's the office? He said. Strange to be there in daylight. She looked at her hands on the counter. I keep looking at things and realizing I've only ever seen them at night. The carpets are a different color than I thought. A lot of things are. The view from my window is better in the morning. She paused. I've been taking my lunch outside, just to the terrace. 15 minutes. I'm working up to longer. He turned off the water and dried his hands. That's good. It's cold. October, he said, the same thing he'd said on the phone, and she looked at him with the particular expression that was exclusively hers, dry and layered and warmer than it pretended to be. "There's something I want to tell you," she said. "Something I want to say out loud, because I've been saying it in my own head for a while and I think it needs to be outside of there." He leaned against the counter. "Okay. When you came to my door that first night, when you knocked and said building maintenance, just checking, I almost didn't answer." She looked at the counter, then at him. "I'd been in that office for 2 weeks by then. My system was working, meals sent up, meetings done by video, everything handled. I'd convinced myself I was functioning." "You were functioning," he said. "I was operating," she said. "It's different. I knew the difference somewhere. I'd gotten very good at not thinking about the difference." She paused. "But you kept coming back. Not to check on me. Not to report me. Just to fix things. And every night I watched you on the cameras, and you were just there. Working. Not performing. Not trying to impress anyone. Not managing your image in an empty building at 2 a.m, just doing what needed doing." Her voice was steady, but something in it had weight. "I don't think you understand what it meant to me to watch that. When everything in my world was people doing things for hidden reasons. Watching you exist without a hidden reason felt like I didn't have a word for it. I still don't have a good word for it." He was quiet for a moment. He thought about the right response to that and couldn't find one that wasn't either too small or too large for the space between them. "I was just working," he said. "I know," she said. "That was the whole point." Lily came back down the hall in her pajamas, the ones with the small dogs on them, slightly too short in the leg because she'd grown and he hadn't gotten around to buying new ones yet, and announced that she was ready for her 9 pages of reading, which was the current nightly negotiated minimum. 9 pages, Sophia said. "We've been escalating," Ethan said. "It started at 5. "The books got better," Lily said by way of explanation, and disappeared again toward her room. Sophia looked at Ethan. He looked at her. 9 pages, she said. "I know." He pushed himself off the counter. "You don't have to wait. I'll wait," she said. "If that's okay." He looked at her for a second. She was sitting in his kitchen under his overhead light, holding Lily's whale drawing in her lap, and she looked not like the CEO in the dark office, not like the woman behind the glass, not like the person who had been making herself small enough to survive. She looked like someone who had arrived somewhere and was, tentatively, carefully, with all appropriate uncertainty, deciding whether to stay. "It's okay," he said. He went and read to Lily, who made it to 11 pages before she fell asleep mid-sentence, her book open on her chest and her face gone slack and peaceful. He marked her page and turned out the light and came back to the kitchen. Sophia was where he'd left her. She'd made tea somehow, having found the kettle in the cabinet with the mugs with the confidence of someone who had mentally mapped the kitchen during dinner and had not found this presumptuous. 2 mugs on the table. She looked up when he came in, questioning. "Out?" she said. "Out." He sat down. He picked up the mug. She made it to 11 pages. That's a 20% improvement. She always does that, goes further than the minimum, and then acts like the minimum was the goal all along. He shook his head. She gets that from somewhere. Sophia looked at her tea. "I wonder where," she said, with just enough dryness in it to make him look at her. And she was looking at him with that expression, warm and layered and unguarded in the way she only was sometimes, the way she'd been getting more of lately. And he laughed. A real one, sudden, brief, and she smiled at it the way she had in the corridor that first time, like it had surprised her into something she wasn't going to fight. They sat in his kitchen and drank their tea and talked about small things, about the building's HVAC inefficiencies, which she apparently had significant opinions about, and about Lily's reading escalation strategy, and about the persimmon tree in Mrs. Park's yard that was apparently visible from his front window if you knew where to look. They talked about Sophia's attorney Claire, who had, it turned out, once successfully argued a case involving a parking dispute that escalated to federal court in a way that involved a llama, which neither of them fully believed, but both of them wanted to. Outside, the October dark settled over the street, and the heater did its slightly too loud thing in the corner, and the whale drawing sat on the kitchen table between 2 mugs of tea. It was ordinary. It was the most ordinary evening Ethan had had in longer than he could precisely locate, and it was also, in some way he was going to need more time to understand, one of the better ones. When she left at 9:30, she had an early meeting, she said, which was a thing she could say now because she was going back to a building in the morning instead of never leaving it. She shook his hand at the door, which should have been awkward and wasn't quite. Her hand was dry and cool and held his for a second with a firmness that was more deliberate than a handshake usually was. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner and for—" She looked at the whale drawing, which she had in her other hand. "For this. Lily gave you that." "I know who gave it to me." She looked at him. "Saturday? There's a coffee place 2 blocks from the building. I've been looking at it from the window for 3 weeks. I want to try going there. You could, if you want, you could bring Lily." He thought about Lily meeting Sophia in daylight, about the questions that would generate. "She'll talk the whole time," he said. "I'm counting on it." He looked at her for a moment on his front step in the October cold, under the porch light that had been running slightly yellow for a week because the bulb was going and he kept forgetting to replace it. "Saturday," he said. She nodded once. She went down the front path to her car, and he watched her go, and the street was quiet around her departure, and the light from the kitchen fell through the window onto the path in a warm rectangle that reached almost to the curb. He went back inside. He cleaned up the mugs. He replaced the porch bulb because he happened to have one and the timing seemed right. He went to check on Lily, who had moved in her sleep so that she was now perpendicular across the bed with one arm over her face and her book on the floor, which was how she slept when she was most deeply out. He picked up the book, put it on her desk, stood in the doorway for a moment. His phone buzzed. One message from Sophia. "I found the coffee place on the map. It opens at 8. Also, I think your porch light went out." He looked at his phone. "Just replaced it," he typed back. A pause. Then, "Of course you did." He put his phone in his pocket and turned off the hall light and went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he fell asleep without lying there first, without the ceiling and the bill stack and the list of things that needed doing holding him up in the dark. He just went to sleep. It was, as these things went, more than enough. The coffee place was called Marin's, and it was exactly the kind of place that existed in the gaps between bigger, louder things. A narrow storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and an insurance office, with 4 small tables inside and 2 on the sidewalk that nobody was using in October, and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said oat milk available, like it was a point of pride. Ethan had walked past it maybe 40 times without going in. Sophia had been looking at it from her 14th floor window for 3 weeks. They arrived at the same time, which wasn't planned but also wasn't a coincidence, because Sophia had texted him her ETA from 2 blocks away, and he'd adjusted accordingly, and he was only just now fully registering how naturally they'd started doing things like that, calibrating to each other without making it a conversation. Lily was with him in her weekend configuration, which meant a jacket she hadn't fully zipped and a hat she was already trying to take off. She looked at the coffee shop, then at Sophia getting out of her car at the curb, and did the quick, whole-body assessment that she did with all new situations. "It's small," Lily said. "Most good things are," Sophia said from the sidewalk, locking her car. Lily considered this. "Our house is small." "Yes," Sophia said. "It is." Lily looked at her for a second and apparently decided this was the correct response, because she turned and went to the door and held it open with the particular gravity of a child who has decided to be helpful and wants it acknowledged. "Thank you," Sophia said, going through. "You're welcome," Lily said, and then to Ethan in what she believed was a whisper. "I like her." Ethan held the door and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that wouldn't make it worse or better in ways he wasn't ready for before 9 in the morning. Inside, Marin's was warm and slightly cramped and smelled like coffee and something baked with cardamom. The person behind the counter was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the unhurried manner of someone who'd been making coffee long enough that they no longer needed to perform enthusiasm about it. She looked at the 3 of them without ceremony. "What can I get you?" Lily ordered hot chocolate with the focused seriousness of a person placing a critical order. Ethan got black coffee. Sophia looked at the handwritten menu on the board behind the counter for a moment and then said, "What's good?" Which was not a question she usually asked, and the woman behind the counter looked at her and said, "The cortado, if you actually want to taste the coffee." And Sophia said she'd have that. They sat at one of the inside tables, the larger one, near the window, which gave Sophia room and gave Lily a view of the street, which she immediately began narrating. It was not a dramatic morning. Nothing happened in the way that the most important mornings often have nothing happen in them. No revelations, no decisive moments, just three people at a small table with their drinks and the sound of the street outside and the October light coming through the window at the low angle it had that time of year. Lily talked. Sophia listened and asked questions and got drawn into a surprisingly extended discussion about whether octopuses were smarter than dogs, which Lily had strong opinions about and had apparently been researching independently. Ethan drank his coffee and watched them and thought, "This is a thing that is happening." He wasn't always good at recognizing things while they were happening. He was better at understanding them later, looking back. But this one he could feel in real time, the specific texture of it, ordinary and irreplaceable at once. He thought about the night he'd first knocked on her office door, about how he'd almost walked away before she answered, about all the small undecisions that had to go a certain way for the three of them to be sitting here right now, in this narrow coffee shop, arguing about cephalopod intelligence on a Saturday morning. He thought, "I almost didn't knock." He thought, "That was the closest I ever came to missing something important." November arrived and the federal investigation moved the way federal investigations move, which is to say methodically and without regard for anyone's desire for resolution. Richard Halverson, James Corley, and Owen Park were formally indicted on 4 counts collectively: securities fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents with intent to deceive, and one additional charge related to the misappropriation of corporate funds that Claire Weston had found in the accounting records from the server archive. Ethan read about it in the news, the same way everyone else did. A small item in the business section, factual and dry, with a photograph of Asterion Technologies' glass and steel exterior and a headline that mentioned the company's name, and not much else. He was eating breakfast when he saw it. Lily was already at school. He sat with it for a moment, this thing that had been enormous in his life, reduced to 4 paragraphs of corporate reporting, and felt the particular flatness that follows the end of something that took a long time to get through. He texted Sophia, "Saw the news." She replied, "Yes." Claire called at 7. She seemed almost disappointed it wasn't more dramatic. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something that felt more like an ending, I suppose." He put his phone down and looked out the window at Mrs. Park's persimmon tree, which had gone fully orange now, the fruit heavy and ready. He understood what she meant. Real endings didn't announce themselves with the weight you thought they'd have. They just arrived, looking like an ordinary Tuesday or an item in the business section, and you had to do the work of understanding that this was it, this was the thing resolving, and let it be enough. That evening he brought a bag of Mrs. Park's persimmons. She'd given him a full bag the week before, triumphant, saying the harvest was excellent, to Asterion. He went in the front entrance, not the maintenance entrance, because he had a reason to be there that wasn't a shift. He signed in at the desk, nodded at Dennis, took the elevator to 14. Sophia's office door was open. The lamp was on, which made him smile without meaning to, because some things were just themselves regardless of context. She looked up when he came in. "Persimmons," he said, holding up the bag. She looked at it. "From Mrs. Park?" "She says the harvest is excellent. I've never had a persimmon. They're good now. They weren't ready in October." He set the bag on her desk. "You have to wait for them." She looked at the bag and then at him, and he could see her understand that this was not entirely about fruit, and she chose to let it sit there between them without turning it into more than it was. "Sit down," she said. "I want to show you something." He sat in the chair across from her desk, an actual chair, a good one, not the edge of the seat he'd managed on previous visits. She turned one of her monitors to face him. On the screen was a presentation deck, still in draft, full of data and architectural diagrams, and a cover slide that read, "Asterion Accessible Innovation Initiative, Phase 1 Proposal." This is what I've been doing, she said, for the last 3 weeks. He looked at the slides. She walked him through them, not formally, not the way she'd present to a board, but the way someone explains something they've been thinking about for a long time to a person they want to actually understand it. The initiative was substantial, a full division dedicated to developing assistive technology, adaptive workplace systems, and accessible infrastructure. Not as a charitable arm, as a core business unit integrated into the company's main revenue structure, with hiring targets that prioritized engineers and designers with disabilities, and a community partnership program that would bring in outside organizations to co-develop the products. This isn't philanthropy, she said. That's the thing I keep having to clarify when I explain it. It's not a foundation. It's not a PR program. It's a business argument that the assistive technology market is enormous and deeply underserved, and that the people best positioned to solve those problems are the people who have been living with them. Including you, he said. She paused. Including me. She said it without flinching, which was different from how she would have said it 3 months ago. The accident took some things. It didn't take what I know about building systems, or what I know about the gap between what technology claims to offer and what it actually delivers for people who need it most. That's actually useful information, if you're building a company that wants to get this right. He looked at the slides, the hiring targets, the partnership structure, the projected reach, thousands of positions over a 5-year plan, with a specific focus on communities that historically had limited access to tech sector employment. How many jobs? He said. Phase 1, 800. 5-year projection, 3,200. If the market performs in the middle range of what the analysis supports. She paused. The board approved Phase 1 last week, unanimously. Yeah, the 2 who voted against you in October? Both yes votes. One of them called me afterward to apologize. She said it without particular satisfaction. The other one just voted yes without calling, which is also fine. I need the vote more than the call. He looked at the screen for another moment. He thought about what it took to sit in a dark office for 3 weeks and then come out and build something like this. Not just rebuild what had been taken, but make it into something that hadn't existed before. He thought about the difference between the woman who'd whispered, "Please don't make me leave," and the woman sitting across from him explaining board votes with the flat precision of someone who had stopped asking permission to take up space. "It's good," he said. "It's a start." She said it the same way he said things like not stopping, with the knowledge that starts were the whole of the battle, most of the time. He transferred out of the night shift in December. It wasn't something he'd planned, exactly. The opening came through the facilities manager, who mentioned in passing that a daytime maintenance supervisor position was opening up in the new year, and had Ethan thought about moving out of nights. Ethan had said he'd think about it, had thought about it for approximately 48 hours, and had said yes. The pay was better. The hours meant he could pick Lily up from school instead of handing her off to Mrs. Park. And something in the logic of his life, which had been organized around a specific kind of solitude for so long that he'd stopped noticing it was solitary, had shifted in a way that made the night hours feel more like a default he'd outgrown than a preference he was choosing. He told Lily at dinner. She stopped eating. She looked at him with the careful attention of someone calibrating news. "You'll be home at night?" "Yeah." "Every night?" "Most of them. Sometimes I'll have a late call, but mostly, yeah." She looked at her plate, looked at him. Something moved across her face that she was trying not to show, which he recognized because she'd gotten it from him. That reflex of not wanting to want something too openly in case it didn't work out. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Okay." She picked up her fork. "Can we get a dog?" "No." "Why not?" "Because we just established I'll be home more and you immediately tried to use it to get a dog." "Those are 2 different things." "They're one move," he said. "I see the move." Lily ate her dinner with the composed expression of someone who had not abandoned the long game. He texted Sophia that night. "Moving today's in January." Her reply came quickly. "How does Lily feel about it?" She asked for a dog. "That's a yes, I think." "It's a manipulation attempt. She's 8. Those are the same thing." A pause, then, "I'm glad. About the days." He looked at his phone in the kitchen light. Me too, he typed. He told Sophia about the Navy once, not the full version. There wasn't a full version he gave anyone, not even Mrs. Park, who had known him for 4 years and had earned most things. But enough. They were at Marin's again, which had become a Saturday fixture in a way that hadn't been decided so much as accumulated, and Lily was at a birthday party for a school friend and wouldn't need picking up until noon, so it was just the two of them and the cortado she always ordered now and his black coffee and the Saturday morning light. She'd asked how he'd learned to be patient, not as a skill, she said, but as a state. Because she watched him, and he seemed to have a relationship with waiting that most people didn't have. He thought about how to answer that honestly, without giving her the version that was easier than the truth. The Navy teaches you to be ready, he said, which sounds like patience but isn't. Ready is tense. Ready is coiled up. I spent 6 years being ready for things. He turned his coffee cup. When I got out, I didn't know how to not be ready. It took a long time to figure out the difference between ready and just present. What figured it out? Lily, mostly. You can't be coiled up around a baby. They don't respond to that. They just scream more. He paused. And the job. Night maintenance. You're in a building that's already done its work for the day. Nothing is urgent. Everything that needs fixing can wait until tomorrow, mostly. You start to learn that being in the middle of something is its own kind of okay. She was quiet for a moment. I've never been good at that, she said. The middle. I want to know the end before I commit to starting. You started a lot of things, he said. Company with 3,000 employees. I was 24. I didn't know enough to be afraid of the middle yet. She looked at the table. The accident taught me to be afraid of it. You start to feel like the middle is where things go wrong, because that's where it happened. He didn't fill the silence. He let it be there between them because she wasn't done. I've been thinking, she said, about that night in the corridor, the first time you knocked on my door. I'd been watching you on the cameras for 9 days by then. She didn't look embarrassed saying this anymore. They'd gotten past the point where she needed to apologize for it. And there was one night about a week in when you were fixing the exit sign above the fire door on 12, and you got down from the ladder and you looked at it for a second. Just stood there looking at it, and I couldn't figure out what you were doing. He thought back. Checking the angle, he said. Sometimes a sign looks straight until you see it from where a person would actually see it. I didn't know that then. I just saw you stand there and look at something ordinary for 30 seconds with complete attention, like it deserved it. She looked at her cup. I'd been in that office for 9 days, and I'd stopped believing things deserved attention. I'd stopped believing I deserved it. She paused. And then there was this man in a maintenance uniform looking at an exit sign like it mattered, and I thought, I want to be wherever that person is. Ethan sat with that. The coffee shop moved around them. A couple came in, ordered, sat at the other window table, had a conversation he wasn't following. Outside, the street went about its Saturday business. You didn't come out, though, he said. No, I waited 9 more days. She looked at him. I'm working on the middle. He looked at her, at the person she was now versus the person he'd first seen through glass, who'd been both more defended and more fragile than she'd had any reason to show a stranger. The person across from him now had those same qualities somewhere inside her still, because people didn't shed the things that had shaped them, they just grew other things alongside. But she was also unmistakably someone who had come back from somewhere. Not all the way back, he didn't think that was how it worked, all the way back. But back enough. Here, enough. You're doing all right, he said. I know, she said. That's still strange to say. The thing between them didn't become something with a name until February. And when it did, it was Lily who named it, the way Lily named most things. Directly, without preamble, during dinner on a Tuesday when Sophia had come over after work and brought takeout from a Thai place she'd found, and they were all eating at the kitchen table over Lily's spelling homework. Lily looked up from her worksheet, looked at Sophia, looked at Ethan, and said, Are you guys together? Ethan opened his mouth. Sophia said, What do you think? Lily considered this with the forensic seriousness she applied to important problems. You eat dinner here a lot, she said, and Dad smiles more. And last week he bought a new coffee mug and said it was for guests. But he means you. Ethan looked at the mug on the counter. He had not said that. He had thought it. "Those are good observations," Sophia said. "So yes?" Sophia looked at Ethan. He looked at her. He thought about the first night, the knock on the door. "Please don't make me leave." He thought about the infrastructure corridor and the drive home in the gray morning, and persimmons and Lily's whale drawing and 2 mugs of tea on a kitchen table, and all the small accumulated weight of being a person alongside another person until the thing between you had too much mass to call it nothing. "Yeah," he said. "I think yes." Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her spelling. "Good," she said. "I already told Mrs. Park." "When?" Ethan said. "Last week." She spelled necessary correctly and moved to the next word. She said it was about time. Sophia was looking at the table with the expression she had when something surprised her into warmth, and she wasn't trying to contain it. Her mouth was doing the thing that it did. Not quite a smile yet, but on the way. She looked at Ethan, and he looked at her. And they didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that the kitchen and the Tuesday evening and Lily's spelling homework weren't already saying. Spring came. The Asterion Accessible Innovation Initiative launched its first product in March, an adaptive interface system for workplace software that had been designed collaboratively between Asterion's engineering team and a group of occupational therapists and disability advocates that Sophia had brought in as paid consultants rather than unpaid advisors, which she said was a distinction that mattered and which Ethan believed her about. The launch was covered in the business press. More coverage than Ethan expected. He read 2 of the articles, skimmed 3 more, and found that the pieces that came closest to understanding what she'd built were the ones that interviewed the people who were going to use it. Not the executives, not the industry analysts, but a woman named Diana, who'd been a software developer before a degenerative condition changed what her hands could do, and who said in the article that the system gave her back something she'd thought she'd lost permanently, which was the ability to do her work at her own pace without the software fighting her. Ethan read that paragraph twice. He texted Sophia, "Saw the piece. Diana." She replied, "She was the first person I called when the product was ready. I wanted her to try it before anyone else." "Did she?" she cried. "Then she told me the keyboard mapping needed work. Then she accepted the job offer to join the team." He looked at his phone in the break room of Asterion's second floor, where he'd been overseeing a lighting upgrade all morning, and felt something that didn't have a clean word but sat somewhere between pride and something warmer. A thing about watching someone use what they'd almost lost to build something that gave it back to other people. The federal case against Halverson, Corley, and Park was resolved that spring as well. All 3 entered guilty pleas on the fraud charges. The sentencing was in April. Halverson received the heaviest penalty, 18 months and a substantial fine. The others, somewhat lighter. Claire Weston sent Sophia a bottle of wine. Sophia texted Ethan a photograph of the bottle with the caption, "I don't know what to do with this." "Give it to Mrs. Park," he wrote back. "Does Mrs. Park drink wine? She'll find a use for it." He was right. Mrs. Park, presented with the bottle the following Saturday, examined it with the air of an expert, said decent year without elaborating, and subsequently produced 3 meals over the next 2 weeks in which he was fairly certain wine was a key ingredient, though she never confirmed this. In May, Sophia moved. Not from the office, she'd been going home every night since October, had been doing that with increasing ease, the apartment no longer feeling like a place she was returning to from a safe location, but simply the place she lived. She moved from the apartment to a house on the other side of the neighborhood. Not the same street as Ethan, but close enough that the walk between them was 15 minutes and took you past the park, where Lily had the climbing structure she was too old for. The house had a ground floor that didn't require any modifications she hadn't been making in her old building anyway, and it had a small yard that she'd described to him as impractical and had then proceeded to plant 3 things in within 2 weeks of moving in, which told him everything he needed to know about how she actually felt about it. Lily helped her move a box of books. This was Lily's own initiative. She heard about the moving day and asked Ethan if she could help, and he said it was up to Sophia, and Sophia said yes. And Lily arrived in her good jacket and carried 1 box of books with the focused seriousness of someone doing an important job, and then sat on the living room floor and reorganized the books by what she described as color, but also vibe, which Sophia accepted without argument and which Ethan suspected she privately approved of. "You have a lot of books about building things," Lily said from the floor. "I like building things," Sophia said. "Dad fixes things. That's different from building." "Is it?" Lily thought about it. "Building is before. Fixing is after." She put a book about structural engineering next to a book about accessible urban design. "But they're both about the same thing." Sophia looked at her. "What thing?" "Making something work," Lily said simply, and moved to the next stack. Ethan was in the kitchen putting dishes in a cabinet, and he heard that through the doorway and stopped for a moment with a stack of plates in his hands and thought, 7 years old, 8 now technically, going on 35, going on somewhere further than that. She would figure out things he would never fully figure out, and she would do it with the directness that she'd had since she was born, since before he fully knew what he was doing, before he'd learned to be present instead of ready, before the night he'd knocked on a glass door and a woman in a wheelchair had almost not answered. He put the plates in the cabinet. He went back to the living room. Lily had the whale drawing out. She'd brought it from home, apparently, without telling him, and was holding it up to show Sophia where she thought it should go on the new wall. "It's been on my wall," Sophia said, "at the office." "I know," Lily said, "but you have a house now. It should be in your house." Sophia looked at the drawing. She looked at Lily. Something moved in her face that she didn't try to manage. "Okay," she said, "where do you think?" Lily studied the wall with the gravity of a curator. She pointed. "There. So you can see it from the couch." Sophia looked at the spot. "Perfect," she said. Ethan found a nail and a hammer in a box labeled Misasi Tools. She'd labeled it herself, and he'd noted when he saw it that the handwriting was the same she used in the margins of maintenance reports, which she still read, a habit she'd said she saw no reason to break. And he hung the whale drawing on the wall in the spot Lily had chosen, which was, he had to admit, exactly right. The three of them stood back and looked at it. A 7-year-old's drawing of a whale eating fish, slightly crooked despite his best effort with the level, hung on the wall of a new house in the May afternoon light. "Good," Lily said. Here is what Ethan Carter learned in the months between a knock on an office door and a whale drawing on a new wall. That bravery was almost never the thing it looked like from the outside. It didn't look like walking into boardrooms and delivering evidence, though that happened. It didn't look like descending into infrastructure corridors in the dark, though that happened too. Mostly, it looked like not stopping, like getting up and making breakfast and walking a kid to school and going back to a building where the lights flickered and the water pressure was wrong and the maintenance log was longer than anyone wanted to deal with, and dealing with it anyway, night after night, without asking the building to notice. That strength wasn't the absence of fear. He'd been afraid of doing the wrong thing, of overstepping, of moving too fast or too slow, or in a direction that would cost someone more than it gave them. Sophia had been afraid of everything outside a set of walls she'd turned into a container for herself. Fear was the constant. The question was never whether it was there. The question was what you did while it was there. That being seen, really seen, not managed, not accommodated, not looked at and then through, was a thing that people could go years without and begin to believe they didn't need. Until someone stood in a corridor at 2 a.m. and checked a vent they didn't need to check. And the difference between being managed and being seen arrived with a clarity that couldn't be unfelt. That families were built from the material at hand. His was a 7-year-old who subracted fish, and a neighbor who grew persimmons, and a woman who had spent 3 weeks watching him fix things until she remembered how to fix things herself. It wasn't what he'd planned. He'd mostly stopped planning things in the years after Lily's mother left, had learned to work with what was in front of him instead of the blueprint that no longer applied. What was in front of him now was better than what the blueprint had been for, which was a thing he was going to need some more time to fully understand, and which he thought that was all right. Lily made him tell her the full story eventually. Not in one sitting, over several nights, in the edited version appropriate for an 8-year-old, leaving out the infrastructure corridor and the federal fraud charges and the parts about the voices through the wall that had made him lie still and make a decision about who he was going to be. The version he told her had a maintenance man and a CEO and a lamp and a building and a lot of broken things that turned out to be fixable. Lily listened to all of it. She asked clarifying questions in her flat, focused way. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was processing something real rather than something simple. She was scared, Lily said. Yeah, and you just kept coming back. It was my job. Lily looked at him with the look she used when she knew he wasn't being fully honest. Dad? He looked at her. Yeah, I kept coming back. Because you knew she wasn't broken, just installed wrong. He hadn't told her that part. He'd forgotten he'd said it once, months ago, casually, and she'd kept it, the way she kept things. Something like that, he said. Lily considered this. I think she was installed right, she said. She just needed someone to plug her back in. He looked at his daughter, her serious face, her slightly crooked ponytail, the remnants of dinner on her sleeve that he was going to have to address before she went to school tomorrow. Yeah, he said, maybe that's it. She seemed satisfied. She picked up her book, 14 pages tonight, she was escalating again, and settled into her pillow. He turned out the light and stood in the doorway. He thought about a woman sitting in a room, watching a man fix a light, and finding in that something worth coming back for. He thought about how the most important things in his life had arrived not announced, not dramatic, but sideways. In a broken bracket, in a child eating cereal and explaining whales, in a text that said we got it while he was lying on cardboard under a truck. He thought about the words she'd said through a barely open door the first night, when she was still afraid and still hiding and had not yet decided whether she was going to stop. Please. Don't make me leave. She hadn't been asking him to fix anything. She hadn't been asking to be rescued. She'd been asking for the simplest thing, the thing that turned out to be the hardest, for someone to stay, to not make her absence feel required, to be present without demanding she perform a version of herself she didn't have left. He'd stayed. Not heroically, not knowingly. He'd stayed because it was his job, and then because it mattered, and then because it was too late to pretend it didn't matter, and then because it was where he wanted to be. That was the whole story, if you were looking for a lesson in it. That staying, just staying, without agenda, without the expectation of return, was sometimes the bravest and most difficult and most human thing one person could do for another. Not fixing, not building, not arriving with evidence and saving the day, though all of that happened in its own time and mattered in its own way. Just staying. He went to bed. Outside, the May night was warm enough to leave the window cracked, and the sound of the street came in with the air, somewhere below, a car passing, someone's music briefly audible and then gone, the ordinary noise of people living their lives in proximity to each other, which was all a neighborhood was, which was all any of this was. He fell asleep. Down the street, in a house with a whale drawing on the wall and 3 newly planted things in the yard, a lamp was on in the front room. Not a desk lamp, not the focused survival mode light of someone hunkered in an office, but a floor lamp, warm and wide, the kind of light that filled a room for no purpose except that a person lived there and wanted it lit. It stayed on until late, the way it sometimes did when she was working and had stopped noticing the time, and then it went off, and the house was quiet. And the street was quiet, and the night was the kind of night that didn't ask anything of anyone. That too was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough.